I think our first stop was in Lima. After 2 flights, and the first thing that came up was I get to his wheelchair, and they had ripped the guts out of it. Even though before you fly, you always say it's an FAA-approved battery, right? It's dry cell, not liquid cell. They had ripped this thing apart. That was the first part of, oh, this is real, right? And then from there, it continued to escalate from, moving Steve from an airplane to a bus to a train to a wheelchair, and there's no paved roads, right? Yeah. You get to Cusco, it's cobblestone.
Yeah. 12,000 feet.
And then you get to Machu Picchu and you start, and the first thing you do is you look down and you're like, oh, this is real. Let's do this.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge, and we welcome our guest, Mr. Blair Casey, Executive Director of Team Gleason. Blair, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us what's going on with the Team Gleason today.
Well, we're an organization that obviously was founded by Steve Gleason, and we were what's known as probably a mom and pop to begin with, family and friends, and helping as many people as we could. And now we're a team of 20 plus. Last year we got over 6,500 requests for technology and equipment nationally. And Steve set a lofty goal for us to reach 70-90% of the ALS population over the next 5 years. And we have a fantastic team that's going to reach that goal.
You know, when you look at your website and you see the images of everyone on your team, I mean, it's very impressive. Like, okay, this is a foundation that is getting stuff done. And it's really fascinating. I want to dig into exactly what you guys are doing and how you got there. But I got to tell you, it's the first time I've met you, and it's clear when I do the research on you that you are a very great human being in doing what you do. You're selfless, compassionate, funny as hell, and committed to changing lives. So I kind of pinch myself when I get to talk to people who are making such a positive impact in the world as you are. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you. So thank you for coming in. When you look at and consider what you're doing today, did you ever think that you would have a career with such impact when you were a youngster?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I don't know that anybody can when it comes to, having family or friends diagnosed with, a terminal illness.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Orleans.
New Orleans.
Born and raised in New Orleans, and I got a scholarship to play football at Millsaps College in Jackson, where I got 3 undergraduate degrees, and then moved back to New Orleans for my first master's, and then I moved to China, and then I moved back from China, and I got my second master's. And
what were you doing in China?
At that point in my life, I thought I was going to be doing international business, so I was teaching at 2 universities to learn a third language, a Mandarin.
Wow. And so your degree focus was like in accounting?
Spanish business accounting, master's in business, master's in accounting.
Oh, my goodness. And things changed.
Things changed.
Tell us how that change happened. And, well, but I also want to ask you, when did Steve Gleason, the awareness of Steve Gleason come into your life?
I knew about him ever since he initially got onto the Saints roster. after he was cut by the Colts.
You were a fan.
I was a fan because, I was always attracted to the people that weren't the biggest or fastest or strongest, but those that had the work ethic and also character to succeed. And those are two things that, as any professional or in my opinion, any human needs that, right?
There's these guys that stand out like Gleason. You mentioned their size and their character enthusiasm. I think of Pat Tillman, and they just played the game with such fierce intensity, and he captured the spirit.
I agree.
Of the Saints.
I agree. Similar to Scott Fujita, right? It's these great humans that are great athletes. They're not the star quarterback of a team, but they are quarterback on the team, right? People listen to them, look up to them, respect them. And all those guys that, we just mentioned, they're ones that put their teammates in a position to be successful. That's a sign of a leader.
Yeah. So how did you meet Steve initially?
So when I was playing football in undergrad, the Saints did a 3-year stint for training camp at Millsaps. And I remember seeing all the guys walk to the practice field and, noticing Steve because Steve had those long locks. And coming from a Catholic school in New Orleans for high school, I couldn't grow my hair out. So as soon as I got to college and playing football, grow my hair out. I tried to wear number 37, but unfortunately a senior had that number. So
he was that much of a focus for you back then?
Yeah.
You really wanted to emulate his style?
I did. I had a Gleason jersey before it was a thing.
Wow.
And it was custom made. It's the only jersey I ever had when I was younger. And me and my buddy growing up, we used to always bicker back and forth who had it first. I still say it's me.
That's awesome. All right, so they're there in spring training, and
they're there, and Steve's wife now, Michelle Versco Gleason, was there. It was his girlfriend at the time, and we, saw each other in passing, and in classic Michelle form, she said, "Oh, hey Blair, you remember me? I used to babysit you when you were 2." I'm like, "Unfortunately, I don't." But I used it to my advantage. So after one of the practices, I walked up to Steve. I was like, "Hey, I know your girlfriend." "How do you know my girlfriend?" I'm like,
she was my baby.
Right. He's like, "I'm joking, man." And after that day, he would just stop every day, and engage me and talk about life, love, culture, religion, family, and at that age of, say, 19, you're just not exposed to many people that invest in you from so many angles in life.
Yeah, I read that you said from those initial interactions, he exceeded your expectations as a human. Like he was talking about things that young people weren't really talking about.
Correct. I mean, you don't have many people in your inner circle that are comfortable digging in and objectively talking about topics maybe that for some are sensitive.
Right.
Right. The way he approaches every conversation, as he does today, is that's how you get to know somebody.
Yeah.
You really dig in. You're vulnerable, right? But you're open.
So you made a connection with. You actually ended up working with him as when he was still a professional athlete.
That's correct. So after undergrad, I moved back to New Orleans, and I was working at a bank and a restaurant, getting through graduate school, and he called me, and I hung up on him. 0 for 2, right, with interactions with him at this point. He called back, and I'm like, "I am sorry." And he asked me what I was doing, and he had a bunch of LLCs and asked me to come oversee his finances and be his personal assistant. So I left those jobs and did that.
So he's a successful football player making bank, doing deals, and he needed
I wouldn't say making bank, right? But he was very wise with his money. He was, there's not many special teams players that get these kind of contracts, right?
Yeah.
That really doesn't exist anymore. But he invested heavily in real estate. Like Steve lived in an apartment, and I'm not exaggerating, that is roughly the size of this room.
Right.
It was a bedroom, and the bedroom was a bed, a restroom, and a little kitchen. Steve invested everything into real estate. I mean, he drove a truck that was ran off of biodiesel. The guy was a minimalist, right? He invested any and all the money that he made into his future. And I was fortunate that he asked me to come along for the ride and trusted me to partake in that.
So he had enough deals going on that he needed some help with it.
Yeah, as well as everything else he had going on. He had, pipe dreams of running the city school bus system off of biodiesel, right? And these are the things like he was actively working on. And so I kind of got roped into, all the different facets of his life. He was cycling, and he was in love with Michelle.
That's awesome. So you fast forward to, then there's Katrina hits, right? You guys are working together. Katrina hits. New Orleans is devastated.
Yep.
And I'm thinking when the Saints get back in the Dome in the 2006 season, right?
So at this point, I was still an undergrad. So I can recall, because that punt, the punt block in that play, I remember watching it and me just jumping in Jackson, off my couch. And I remember all my friends from all over the place were like, "Why is he so excited?" And the neatest part was his interview after. I mean, I think everybody remembers the play, but nobody remembers the character that somebody, displays and the humbleness that he had. He put it all on the coach for putting him in a position, his teammates for opening and executing that gap, and all he did was his role. He had the smallest part in it. Yeah. That's how he communicated it.
Yeah.
So humble. But
it was transformational for the city. It's a first game back in the Dome, right? And it made a statement. New Orleans and Louisiana was desperate for a comeback. They were desperate for some sense of normalcy. And it's interesting how much became of that. It resulted in a score, but it was something much bigger for the Saints and for the city of New Orleans, and I'd argue for the state of Louisiana. And it became this huge turning point, which was the start of, for many people, the Gleason story, right? You were lucky to know him before then, but a lot of people, he wasn't necessarily, he brought a lot of awareness to people that may not have known otherwise.
I agree. And I think, we often use the word resilient and resiliency. I feel like the city of New Orleans is resilient, but it was post-Katrina and that pump block that the city needed something, not just a moment. They needed to know that things were going to get better and change.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of that change and the beginning of understanding, like, we're all resilient here.
I mean, the question was, is New Orleans even going to come back, period? There was senators, begging it to Congress for, money to rebuild the city. And there were other senators saying, New Orleans is toast. We're not dumping any more money in that place, kind of thing. And all that was going on. And for those that there know it, but those that weren't, it was an extremely trying time. And there was a lot of questions about what's going to come. I mean, school systems wiped out, transportation systems wiped out, jobs, employment, tourism, everything was just trashed over, in a short period of time. And the images on the national news were just grueling. And so the fact that they were coming back, that's a fantastic story.
And it brought, it didn't just bring the fans back, it brought the city, the population. You got to think, how many people were gone after Katrina?
Yeah.
How many people came back?
Right.
I don't know many cities that, would do the same. I think everybody would move, leave, and knowing that we live in a fishbowl, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But that play certainly lit a spark. It ignited everybody's passion for the city, for the Saints.
Yeah, and it kind of led to a trajectory. Drew Brees is in town, and the start of something great there. And ultimately, Steve Gleason retired in 2008.
Correct.
And the Saints continued on a trajectory to win the Super Bowl in 2010.
Correct.
When did you first become aware of Steve's diagnosis?
Steve was diagnosed January 6th of 2011, officially. And so right around that time, he had sent an email to some close friends. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I could recite it. I mean, that's the crazy part of it is it's so real. Anytime I think about it, I can feel it in every part of my body.
Yeah.
him acknowledging being scared, being frustrated, but wanting to use the same resiliency, right, and perseverance that kept him in the NFL. But he was scared, and he wanted to be honest. Steve had a harebrained idea. He wanted to drive his wheelchair with his eyes, right? He was no longer able to use a joystick. We had tried everything from 8 switches. He wanted to be able to get around and see his son grow, right?
Because he's no longer able to do this movement.
Correct. With ALS, it's a progressive disease that eventually your brain stops being able to send signals to your body, and your muscles atrophy. And so, there's no rhyme or reason why your upper extremities go first or your lower extremities. So because of his progression, right, and I can go through that if you'd like, at this point he wanted to be able to just drive his chair, and we saw the toll it was taking on him. So he's like, we'll ask Microsoft. So we went up there, and within a month they had a prototype.
Unbelievable. And that may have been the connection that where Microsoft ran a commercial during the Super Bowl with Gleason to show the impact that technology can have on humanity.
Correct. But the unintended outcome that I did anticipate was the first video I saw of somebody benefiting from this technology was a 12-year-old boy with cerebral palsy. It broke me. Being around ALS, you see the progression, you see the toll it takes on a family. But seeing the joy in a 12-year-old boy's eyes, being able to get around by himself again, we never knew that would be the impact.
Yeah. The public had little awareness of ALS, just to generalize at that time. We knew Lou Gehrig's disease. We knew about Lou Gehrig, the Iron Horse, and his speech at Yankee Stadium when he announces to the world, in the end said he's the luckiest man in the world. And but that was Lou Gehrig's disease, right? That's how it got branded in the late 30s.
Correct.
And then Steve Hawking was another.
He lived with ALS for 52 years, Stephen Hawking.
And but beyond kind of big examples like that, if you didn't have that experience in your family, you might not know what ALS was. But it seemed as if Steve was a tremendous catalyst in bringing awareness, probably globally. It seemed fairly shortly after, if I have my dates right, that he started filming and documenting the journey.
That's correct. He thought if the experts were right and he had 2 to 5 years to live, that he wanted to leave the best of himself on for his son and his wife. Small things like how to skip a rock, how to tie your shoes, right? Your first kiss. And it led to something much bigger just because of Steve's commitment. It ended up being over 1,200 hours of footage. His video journals turned into Scott Fujita meeting with him and saying, you got something here. You should turn it into, your life's work.
So it kind of started as like a vlog for his son. Correct. At the time. And then, of course, it became so much more. So at some point along the way, did professional videographers come in and take over?
They did. Ty Mitten Small was hired, and Ty actually lived with me for about a year and a half. And then David Lee were the 2 videographers, and they became a part of the family.
What became clear is the raw relationship, story between he and his wife, and how real that was, and then what it really takes to care for someone in that condition, and your commitment to that family was it was spectacular. That became the film Gleason, which went on to critical acclaim. Tell us what that experience was like.
It was a roller coaster. In hindsight, going through everything with Steve and Michelle and Rivers, that was a result of ALS. We always moved past things, right? It really, you can far too often make small problems real big, right? And you can't handle big problems. They always made the big problems small, the small problems non-existent, but we had to keep on going, right? We couldn't just let a part of the progression manifest. And so we often, my approach was always humor. And Michelle and I, we go back and forth, bickering and bantering and, making sure that we were in a good place. So when the documentary came out, it was the first time, and, I felt it, right? Watching it, in a sense, is different from experiencing it in person, because you realize how hard and raw some of those moments really are. And that's life, right? I applaud Steve and Michelle for being vulnerable and exposing to the world not just all the good things, but the really hard times, trying times.
People had to see that. It would be a disservice for them not to see the real challenges in caring for someone like that, which virtually every family who, whether it's someone with ALS or dementia or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or, so many other conditions have to deal with. And that's reality, that is reality. And to see that someone was brave enough to share that is just like golden. And of course, that's why it was so well received.
I agree. You never think about the caretaker, which is 99% of the time a family member, a father, a mother, a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, right? Those people aren't necessarily taken into consideration.
Right.
So, a person is diagnosed with ALS. The family is living with ALS.
Right.
Having focus on a caretaker, they're half of the equation, right? If they're not physically healthy, rested, mentally healthy, then they can't be there when the times really do get tough.
I've heard it said about Alzheimer's, and I think this applies if you have an elderly person in your family with Alzheimer's and the spouse who's also elderly caring for them, that it takes the life of the person with Alzheimer's and the caregiver.
Correct.
And it's that consuming, It
is, and you have to make sure you don't lose focus of the relationship, right? Relationships are all about communication, whether it be in a marriage, in a friendship, in a professional setting. It's all about communication. As a result of ALS, communication slows down, right? We speak on average 140 to 160 words per minute. QWERTY keyboard typers, you're looking at high-end 40 to 60. With eye gaze, you're looking at 12 to 16 currently. So the rate of communication drastically slows down.
So that's one letter at a time, right?
Correct.
Your eyes picking up.
So you're gazing over a keyboard, an on-screen keyboard, and every say 0.2 of a second, it's clicking on a letter, and then with word completion algorithms, second completion algorithms, which are advancing, you basically formulate sentences, and from sentences, he hits play, and he banked his voice, so his synthetic voice comes out with what he said. That being said, what we're talking about right now, if we ask him a very long question, you have to think about the response time. Back to the communication point. And that was a focus that they naturally they didn't lose it, but they were so busy that they didn't focus on it enough. And they changed that.
When you say they?
Steve and Michelle.
Yeah.
And same thing with any family. It's one thing that our team always says is make sure you keep up with communication. You can't get mad at ALS, right? When you get frustrated, if you're frustrated with the person, you communicate, articulate what it was that frustrated you in a relationship to talk it out. But oftentimes you're mad at ALS.
Right.
So you don't know how to communicate that. You don't know how to articulate that. That's okay as long as you know that you're acknowledging that that's there.
This podcast is sponsored by NAI Latter & Blum, Louisiana's leading commercial real estate firm, offering expertise in every discipline, including office, industrial, retail, multifamily, and corporate services. Their agents guide you through the real estate process from start to finish, using a host of marketing, prospecting, and analytical technologies. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the most trusted name in commercial real estate, NAI Latter & Blum. Learn how they can work for you at www.ladderblum.com. Turnkey Solutions is a nationwide cybersecurity and IT systems expert, providing the services that growing businesses need to stay ahead of hackers, hurricanes, and IT nightmares. With 24/7 support teams and offices across Louisiana and Texas, they bring peace of mind to companies of all sizes. Their 5-star rated team provides lightning-fast IT support with the cybersecurity and business continuity solutions today's businesses demand. When you're looking for a technology partner to provide you with peace of mind, find out more by calling them at 225-224-6594 or chat with them online at www.tks.la/NXT. When did Team Gleason officially start?
October of 2011.
And what was that start? What did that look like?
So Steve noticed when he was diagnosed that there was a lot of ALS organizations, nonprofits, majority of them focusing on research or just they had multiple buckets, right? So quality of life, maybe respite care, maybe some technology, some equipment, some research, some advocacy, but there was really no organization focusing on the now needs, right? And he saw people like Stephen Hawking, right, who lived with ALS for 52 years. He saw individuals that were leveraging technology to be independent, to allow them to look for purpose in life, like we all do. And so for that reason, he started Team Gleason, right, with a mission to provide leading-edge assistive technology, simultaneously advance those technologies while creating a larger global conversation surrounding the disease. Hopefully it comes to an end, but we got to give the people the tools now to fight and be independent.
I mean, it's just so hard to fathom how he can be dealing with this situation in his life, which is changing.
Right.
And yet he's looking out to others and how he can help others. And in order to do that, that just sounds so like an insurmountable obstacle, but
selfless.
That's what he was out to do.
Selfless.
So when he brings up these ideas, you're there with him, he's talking to you about it?
So there was a small group of family and friends, all of which are still board members of Team Gleason and I say board members, they're more like active employees, but board members as well. And these individuals, alongside with Steve, Michelle, Steve's father-in-law, Paul Verisco, who's the chairman of the board, former executive director, everything was a roundtable discussion, right? That's how we started. And we really picked apart how we do this, why we do it, what's the visibility that we're going to get to try to expose this person, this patient, and this story. And that evolved to where we are now, which is a well-oiled machine of delivering advancing assistive technology. But it all started around a table just like this, with good humans that were dedicated, passionate, and that Steve trusted.
Okay, so when you talk about assistive technology, is that mainly the voice?
So I think the easiest way I could explain it is like the ALS progression, what those needs are, right? To kind of paint the picture for you. So Steve's diagnosed, and there is no rhyme or reason why you lose one thing before the next. But in Steve's case, his voice started to deteriorate a little bit, and he lost dexterity of his hands, right? So, he would text everything to people or use voice to text until he couldn't use his hands. At the same time, his voice was getting labored, which is known as dysarthric speech. So we'll start with the speech. We banked his voice. And by banking his voice, Team Gleason Foundation cannot do that due to our bylaws. Steve's friends went and did a fundraiser to get him a synthetic voice. At that point, it was $12,000. And he had to record, I believe, like 2,800 phrases to get his synthetic voice to where when he speaks, it sounds like him.
Okay, so when that idea came up to recording his voice, was that in itself new at that time?
Yes and no. Did it exist? Yes. Was it out there and were speech language pathologists or clinicians recommending this service? No.
And the difference then is that if you consider how we would hear Stephen Hawking today, you would hear a mechanized robotic kind of voice because he was unable to do that at that time. Probably that technology didn't exist.
Correct.
And then Steve is, if I understand correctly, was kind of racing the clock at that time. As you mentioned, his voice skills are diminished. And so he had to record all this so that this synthetic voice, which would lace it all together. So as he typed with his eyes, rather, that would then convert to his voice.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. He was proactive about it. But again, it was his own doing. And look, in New Orleans, I will say, the LSU Health and Science Center, they have an amazing speech language pathology program, and their director is actually, she was ahead of her time. She is ahead of her time with recommending these solutions.
Oh, wow.
But that technology was still dated, and it was also very costly. So that's one of the main programs that Team Gleason provides. Last year, I believe we had 1,400 requests for these services nationally, just for synthetic voices. But it's not good enough in a sense. It doesn't capture tone, inflection, right? Voice is identity, right? It's culture.
Right.
So we've been actively working with the manufacturers to improve upon it, and continue to form partnerships with the best available, while we also work with what might be coming down the pipeline. So that's synthetic voices as a whole in our program. And I'm going to try to keep you through this journey, as I told you it was with Steve's progression. From there, his leg started to weaken. He actually used a wheelchair before he used a communication device. So the wheelchair process, you have to get fitted by an OTPT, right? And it's really a chair that makes sure your body, your posture, right, it supports you. That process, has gotten a lot easier because we now have partnerships with every wheelchair manufacturer, Quantum, Permobil. But Steve, it took a little while for Steve to adjust to that until he saw the benefit of being independent again. And I remember we went to Mosca's for dinner one night, and on the way back, we stopped at, there's, amazing gas station casinos out there. And I remember Steve got out and he just left, right? Like he was free. We're in the middle of nowhere. And at that point, from that point moving forward, like that chair became an extension of him, right? Which it is. And again, he started finding things that could have changed with the chair, eventually getting to the communication device, the eye gaze device. And, a result of that also was his idea to drive the wheelchair with your eyes. That didn't exist. Everything that came in between that, Steve's ability to access environment. Like we think of, Alexa's, Google Assistant, voice assistants, home automation, we think of it as a nice luxury, right? For people that need it, it's access, right? When you talked earlier about the caretaker's involvement and family members, if you have to ask somebody every single time you want to turn a light on, ask somebody every single time it's too hot, ask somebody to change the channel, right? I mean, that becomes very cumbersome, and it puts a lot of stress on the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
So home automation became a focus of ours. So, finding a system that would work with any input, meaning your hands, your voice, eventually your eyes. It has to be a universal interface that works with all operating systems, right? It needs to work on iOS. It needs to work on Windows. It took us a good bit, but we figured it out, and we continue to advance that. Why? Because it's access, it's independence, and big tech's doing a really good job of making sure it's affordable while also taking into consideration, the inclusive needs that exist. From home automation, there was all the alternative drive controls, currently seat elevation, the ability to raise your wheelchair up. I mean, you imagine you go to a restaurant and everybody's sitting at a high top. How do you feel not being able to be eye level? Right. It's things that many people would overlook, but then you look at the medical benefits of it, right? Again, it's access, it's independence, and it's a necessity for people that need these, these tools, these solutions to continue to find purpose. So that's the rough gambit of, synthetic voices, voice banking, AAC, alternative augmented communication, home automation, and one thing I didn't mention is our advocacy efforts. I mean, we passed the Steve Gleason Act and Steve Gleason Enduring Voices Act, which mandated Medicare cover 80% of a communication device.
Now, how did you do that? How did Team Gleason get that done?
We have a very strong board when it comes to our involvement with legislative efforts. The assessor for Jefferson Parish, Tommy Capella, Claire Durrett, who's been in policy forever. It only took one story of hearing from a patient, getting their device taken away because of the Medicare policy lapse and not being able to tell their loved ones goodbye.
Yeah, that's
that one story was enough to light a fire under all of us, to make our way to DC. And we immediately met with Secretary Burwell, and we were able to plead our case, and we passed the Steve Gleason Act. Since we did it so quickly, it had a sunset. So we then had to pass the Steve Gleason Enduring Voices Act, which is the lay of land forever.
That was in 2016?
Correct.
Yeah.
2015 and 2016.
Okay, Blair. So it's amazing what you guys have been able to accomplish. And it seems to me, what it takes is someone that can build a team around them, like Steve was able to do. Someone that has the compassion beyond their condition to help others, which I think is defining of Steve's personality. Builds a team. The team is able to see and live the reality of Steve's life. And with all of his notoriety in professional sports and what he did and what he meant to the city at the most impactful time, and there was a voice there that was ready to be received, and it was received, and then you start impacting the world through Team Gleason and providing services and working on this technology and changing lives, changing Steve's lives initially, and then with his drive making that what he wants to be his legacy, and then leading all the way up to enacting legislation is just amazing. It's just amazing.
He's got quite the resume, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in hindsight, I look back and, again, I like to kind of paint the picture with his diagnosis and with some of these accomplishments and advancements that we only knew because we experienced it. And he was the only one who would have those harebrained ideas on how to fix it.
Yeah.
If you look at speech, non-standard speech, I mean, I mumble. I'm from New Orleans, but for people with ALS, as they progress, their voice becomes dysarthric.
Right.
These voice assistants, your phone or external voice assistants, their models are made off of people like me,
yeah,
which don't help people that are progressing. Right. That was kind of the impetus. It's, with Google or Microsoft, Google for non-standard speech recognition, we worked with Project Euphonia and we collected more non-standard speech data to actually allow these models to start recognizing, understanding speakers that are starting to slur their speech. His insight into how to approach these companies, these challenges, is part of our moral fiber at Team Gleason, right? Everybody, I don't know how it happened so naturally, but the way that he approached these challenges is the same way every team member at Team Gleason approaches those challenges. Starts with the patient, the community, right? And then it comes to finding the proper partners to execute. And we've now done that successfully with Google, Microsoft, Comcast, Apple, Amazon, and then brain control interface, Synchron, and then Elon Musk's company, Neuralink.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Part of the culture that I picked up on with Team Gleason is adventure, the sense of adventure. And Steve from the Pacific Northwest was an outdoors guy and loved nature. And I read that he and Michelle, after he got the diagnosis, he and Michelle outfitted a van.
The Iron Horse.
The Iron Horse after Lou Gehrig.
Yep.
And went on an adventure, right? And which would sound fascinating. And but one of the things I think that Team Gleason did early was provide adventures to ALS patients.
That's correct. People often overlook the adventure program, it's our life experience program, and they ask why. Well, it's great that we provide these tools. People don't understand what these tools are. People don't understand what ALS is. How do you get people to understand? The human story, right? And I've always known Steve as the one who was a counterculture athlete. Like football didn't define him. Life, traveling, and culture defined him, right? And that's what our adventure program is about. It's telling the human story making sure people have the tools to do what they always wanted to do, right? The first big adventure we had was Machu Picchu. We climbed Machu Picchu with Steve and Kevin Swan, and that's a story of somebody always wanting to do something and not letting ALS be the reason why they didn't do it.
But Blair, that story it's hard to fathom. It is hard to fathom. I saw it on A Football Life.
That's correct.
Steve Gleason, maybe a 30-minute documentary of that trip to Machu Picchu. Now, I've been to Machu Picchu.
So
I took a train in to Aguas Calientes, the town at the bottom of Machu Picchu. I took a bus up 2,000 feet on little switchbacks. I got to Machu Picchu. The elevation change was so dramatic to me because I'm just a flatlander. I fell over, and I was sick. I saw it, but I didn't really walk around the whole thing. I mean, I was done.
Right.
I was done. This altitude just kicked me. You guys did the Inca Trail. You guys hiked in 11 miles on the Inca Trail, carrying two guys in wheelchairs. It was treacherous. It was unbelievable.
That's the definition of a Team Gleason Adventure, right? The life experience. It's everything leading up to it. It's everything you experience during it, and it's the story you tell after it, right? And that was a long story, just because, to your point, planes to trains to buses. I think our first stop was in Lima. After 2 flights, and the first thing that came up was I get to his wheelchair, and they had ripped the guts out of it. Even though before you fly, you always say it's an FAA-approved battery, right? It's dry cell, not liquid cell. They had ripped this thing apart. Steve and Michelle were pissed.
You find that out in Lima?
Oh yeah. When they were trying to figure out why they couldn't get off the plane. I fixed it. Luckily I had enough experience with it, and that was the first part of, oh, this is real, right? And then from there it continued to escalate from, moving Steve from an airplane to a bus to a train to his wheelchair, and there's no paved roads, right? Yeah. You get to Cusco, it's cobblestone.
Yeah. 12,000 feet.
And then you get to Machu Picchu and you start, and the first thing you do is you look down and you're like, oh, this is real. Let's do this.
But the journey, folks, you have to watch that documentary, A Football Life, Steve Gleason, and there's certainly parts in there about Steve's life, but the videography and the story told about that travel in. Did you get injured on that day?
We ran out of water, and we really didn't bring. Well, everybody else had water, but we made sure. I stopped drinking water towards the end because I want to make sure we had some. I was just huffing oxygen, but we didn't really have lunch. What we did have what looked to be some raw chicken. So I'm pretty sure it was either that or, me putting water in my face from some of the, the rivers that we passed by to keep cool, that I probably took some waterborne pathogen. I finished, got Steve down, and then I went back up and helped Kevin come down. And then we had dinner, and then I was out for 3 days. I had about 8 IVs. I couldn't move. I don't remember much of it other than a few pictures. Hopefully there's not any inappropriate pictures that they took of me, because I wouldn't know. And I remember coming out of it and finally seeing Machu Picchu, right? It's finally actually in the daylight, going out and looking up, because we did 4 hours in the dark.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That's the one thing they said, don't do. Whatever you do, don't get caught on the trail in the dark. Because as you know, there's no room for error. There's zero margin.
There's images of y'all traversing these trails, carrying 2 guys on wheelchairs with jerry-rigged mechanism, and it looks like a 1,000-foot drop on one side,
Yeah, those are my feet probably in that image that you're thinking of, where you're just walking over, and if the ledge, you're not coming back. You'd be lucky if they found you.
Oh, that was exhilarating. So I don't know that I would have appreciated. I always looked at anyone who did the Inca Trail to get to Machu Picchu was a rock star. And then I saw that documentary. I'm like, okay, we got to redefine rock star here.
It was something else. I mean, and we enlisted Sherpas for help. They didn't even know what they were in for. I mean, our guide left us, Hector. Yeah, I remember his name. I mean, we're like, where did Hector go? After the first 2 hours, he might have come back once and then he disappeared, as did, some of the other people helping that were supposed to help carry Steve and Kevin. They signed up to help us, but they didn't sign up for
that.
What actually took place.
Yeah. We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. This podcast is sponsored by Mayhall, Fondren Blaze, a Louisiana business litigation firm offering sophisticated legal advice that is tailored to meet the needs of their individual clients, including a wide variety of litigation, complex business negotiations, corporate formations, closings, and title examination. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the expertise of MFB, a Louisiana practice made for business. Learn how we can work with you at www.mfbfirm.com. Could you or your business benefit from a comprehensive financial plan? Our sponsor, Centura Advisors, is a locally owned firm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana that specializes in personal and business financial planning, tax planning, corporate retirement plans, and investment management. We provide an all-in-one wealth management service so busy business owners like you can take back your valuable time. Visit www.centura-advisors.com to learn more. Centura Advisors, it's time to plan your future. Blair, I forgot about this part of the Machu Picchu documentary thing, and it was before you started, and y'all are in Cusco, I think, and it's like the team was broken before you got going, and y'all met this girl named Jenny, who had climbed Machu Picchu the day before wearing a Team Gleason shirt.
That's right.
No white flags.
That's right. So when we got to Cusco, there was a few mishaps, one of which was my fault. I remember, accidentally yanking on Steve's feeding tube or suprapubic catheter, to things getting, everything we shipped didn't make it there. Like, we still think it's in transit, right? Everything that we sent ahead of time, all of our supplies, so none of it made it ever.
Oh my God.
To just Steve being beat up, because getting into Cusco, I mean, when I say cobblestones, it's like the top of a basketball, except it's not round, right? So you imagine what that does to a wheelchair, for somebody that has no control over their body.
And you see that in the video. It's just like, you would think after 10 feet, it would just be completely exhausting.
So even going to that dinner, we had already experienced all that, and we're like, let's do it. Like, we got to do this to get back on the right path, and, call it fate, call it whatever you want, karma. We had just picked Steve up up a ledge about the height of this table. Scott, myself, and two of the camera guys. That's about 550 pounds, 600 pounds. We picked it up because there are no ramps.
Yeah, sure.
And so at this moment, I remember getting him inside, sitting down, and all of a sudden she was like, "Excuse me." Jenny walks up, her boyfriend. Is that Steve Gleason? I'm like, yes, it is. She was like, oh my gosh, I just climbed Machu Picchu. And I'm like, whatever you're about to say, hold it. Please go inside. She's like, are you sure? I'm like, please. And that's where, she comes in, and I remember Steve's crying, Michelle's crying. We're all just in awe, because all of a sudden that interaction and Jenny's story, it changed the future of the trip, right? We needed a new start. That was the new start to get through what the next day had in store for us.
Yeah, it's almost like a message from God, like, this is your reset button.
Correct.
This lady had climbed it the day before wearing the Gleason No White Flags shirt, right? And that was chilling, man.
People ask, was that real? I'm like, no, we paid somebody to fly to Cusco to come tell Steve, right?
Yeah. Oh man, that is so raw and so real. Okay, I want to talk about some other things going on. Tell us about the Gleason House.
So the Gleason House for Innovative Living, was modeled after the sailing residence, the Leonard Florence Center in Boston. So Steve started the sailing residence, and I'm going to try to separate my Steves here. And Steve Gleason had visited it. And so, like everything, Steve has these ideas that he wants to have one of these in every major NFL city. Learning that process and how that's done on a state level, on a federal level, it's everything from funding to the technology to the care. It's a lot that goes into it to do it successful. The Leonard Florence Center had done it successfully.
And when you look at the Gleason House right now, it's a multi-story building. It would be a place where patients with ALS could live.
Yeah, so it's within a nursing home, St. Margaret's Nursing Home, and it's a neighborhood within there because, again, when we talk about the models of doing something like this, you either have a new construction, right, and you're responsible for all the operating overhead, or you build into an infrastructure, a nursing home, and that way you supplement that.
Got it.
But the other thing is the cost, right? In Louisiana, they have two enhanced rates that allow for additional care, right? Because your average nursing home patient is not an ALS patient. So all of this factors in, and then it's fully automated, right? So controlling your environment with your voice, right? Everything from lights, thermostats, doors, you name it. And then it's got, top level care. Everybody doesn't have access to the care element, right? And so we always want to make sure that everything we do is inclusive. We're taking into consideration the entire population as opposed to a portion of the population.
Right.
So that idea that we did try to scale turned out to be more difficult than anticipated because of all the different funding models, right? You've got to figure out if it's state supplemented, federally supplemented, endowment, a combination of private, endowment, state. And then each state has different regulations.
Okay, so the first Gleason House was in New Orleans, right?
Correct.
And Steve's idea was to expand that to every NFL city?
That was the initial idea. And it's still a great idea. It just, as we all know, everything great comes with challenges.
Yeah, I mean, that is what you just described as the challenges just with funding. And anytime you're dealing with, insurance or Fed money or Medicare or Medicaid, whatever, it's got to be just incredibly challenging. But to have that vision. So the Gleason House in New Orleans right now can have how many residents?
9 residents. And so, I mean, that whole model, as much as I wish that we had the ability to expand upon it, I can't emphasize enough the importance. If you do something for the community, you have to make sure that's sustainable, right? The community cannot have something given to them, a resource, and it be taken away.
Right.
They rely on that, right? You take it away, you've hurt more than you've helped. So the idea of expanding something like that, we had to make sure that we had the community's best interest in mind and that anything that we do is sustainable, right? So New Orleans is sustainable, but that's where we took everything we learned from there and we actually used it into all of our other programs, right? We used that model to advance our home automation program, right? We used that model to enhance our access to in-home care.
There's so many different parts of the Team Gleason story and Steve's life, things that you see as you do research on him. I think of adventures. You see him skydiving, going out and living life. He went and got his MBA.
Correct.
I mean,
post-diagnosis.
Post-diagnosis, like he's going to live life. He was going to keep living. Just so many things there. And as he started to share his story with the world, as he got support behind him and started to bring awareness to the public about ALS. All sorts of things happened. He ended up being a guest at the United Nations.
Correct.
What was that experience like?
So that actually happened twice, and the focus was basically ensuring that innovative solutions continue, and especially innovative solutions that focus on people that need to use them, right? So, people with ALS are super testers. If you look at all of the technology advancement that we've participated in, it always comes with the family, the patient, the caregiver, and our specialist, right? We have clinicians on staff. That's the model that ensures any consumer-based product is going to work and work well. Why? Because they beat it up quicker than the average consumer will.
Got it.
So the focus is on, look at these super testers, right? And so the more we can be involved with the advancement of these technologies, the better off the companies are going to be, because we put it through a rigorous testing process, access process, right? And it's being tested by people that have to use it. There's a difference between a need user and a want user.
Right. These
people have to use it to be independent.
Yeah. So when Steve gave did he give a talk? Did he write a speech?
Oh, yes.
And so the speech is then, he wrote it with his eye recognition, right?
Correct.
And then he got up from the UN and then was able to.
Correct.
Push play?
He hit play. And what Steve does, though, when he does these speeches, he does write it ahead of time, but he pauses. Like, he has his own way of leveraging the technology and demonstrating cadence and pausing for importance, right? So it doesn't just read through right away. Yeah. He actually changes his punctuation during it when he wants something to sound different. If he realizes something is actually funny or something is more important, he'll change things on the fly. And if it's funny, you can normally see he'll start laughing before it even comes out because he laughed in his head about it. It's similar to what he does when he sees me. He'll laugh and I'm like, just get it out now, buddy. But he does very well with, manipulating what he has to make sure it's more authentic.
But is there a clearer way to show the power of exactly what you're doing
than technology?
Right? That's awesome. In 2019, he was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for his contribution to ALS awareness. You read things like this, it's like, oh my God, the impact this guy is having in the world.
You look at, that was surreal. You look at the people that were in attendance, right? His circle, the people that helped him be independent, helped him continue to grow as a spiritual human, right? Everybody from Jenny LeFleury, the chief accessibility for Microsoft, to Michael Brenner from Google, right, who teaches at Harvard, lead mathematical scientist or applied physics, to Drew Brees, to people with ALS, and me. Like, he invited me. I think he felt like he had to. But this is the gamut of people outside of myself that are there, right, for him.
No kidding.
As well as all the supporters from the House and the Senate that have helped us pass legislation over the years. It was beautiful. I mean, it was literally every walk of life, all of which felt the same way about Steve.
You mentioned Drew Brees, and I'm taken back to the unveiling of the statue of the Gleason block in the Punt and
Rebirth Statue,
and the speech that Drew did in introducing Steve, and man, just so authentic and so real, and then of course the first thing Steve does is crack a joke about it, and but man, that was special.
Yeah, the first time I had a 12-foot statue of myself was never. I remember like it was yesterday. Because Drew does deliver such a powerful, passionate, speech about Steve and their relationship.
I mean, his love for the guy was palpable. It was, which made it all so real, because, of course, Drew had the love of the city and the state, and to see that connection was strong.
The whole team came out to the statue unveiling. So Sean Payton and the rest of the coaching staff brought every single player. They all came for that unveiling. We were fortunate. The Saints have been a long time supporter of Team Gleason. Mr. B and Mrs. B, the Bensons. They're really good people, right? And for Steve and his family, it's genuine, it's authentic. And as it relates to their support of Team Gleason, it's just as genuine and authentic. That whole organization from top down, Mickey Loomis, Benzel, Lauscha, Sean, Dennis, now Dennis Allen. We've been very fortunate that these people are who they are, and they're actually good people that support us.
Well, I want to ask about you, wrapping up here, and your support of the Gleason family. You've been selfless for years now, and have you considered what it is about you that causes you to provide such unfailing support, not only to Gleason initially, but all the families with ALS across the U.S.?
Life's all about relationships. I've been fortunate that the relationships that I have with Steve, Michelle, and others that are either living with ALS or lost, their battle with ALS, they've invested in me and they've trusted me. These relationships are what have made me whole, right? I look at all of the individuals that I've come close to, assemble my own personal board of directors, right? People want me to be better because they know that I want to be better for my team, for the community, and ultimately, this will allow me to change the future, right? Things haven't changed with ALS for too long. It takes trust. It takes persistence, passion, a little bit of crazy. But that's what I'll never, ever lose, because people won't understand what that is until you experience it. And that comes with a lot of pain and adversity. But that builds trust, it builds character. I never would have gotten that in a classroom. I never would have gotten that, in any other role. But it's one that I'll have forever, and I owe it to the people that believe in me, and people that will continue to help me and everybody else on our team be as good as we possibly can.
We talked about Steve and Michelle's son Rivers, and they have a second child. Gray,
baby Gray.
A beautiful girl. And when you look at the Gleason family legacy, or maybe I should just say Steve Gleason's legacy, you would think that being an NFL football player would be, legacy enough. But if you look what Steve and his family and his extended team have created in the post-diagnosis, with the Team Gleason, I mean, it makes everything else pale in comparison. And to have that passion while you're dealing with a debilitating condition, to want to improve the lives of others in a dramatic way, is just spectacular.
I often hear him say, our futures are much brighter than our past. And Steve has certainly, post his NFL career, has created a future for not just himself, but for everybody living with a disease like ALS, whether it's ALS, whether it's MS, And what will define Steve, in my opinion, is what he accomplished after he retired.
Yeah, for sure.
Not before.
What do you see as executive director of Team Gleason as the long-term vision?
I think we envision a world where people with ALS have the tools to do what they want to do in life. Every person with ALS, right? Empowering people with the best to do whatever it is they want to do, whether it's a parent teaching a child how to teach, whether it's an architect continuing to design, whether it's a producer continuing to make music, right? It's our goal to make sure that these tools are advancing and readily available, whether it be the current state of the medical device industry, or whether it be a Google, a Microsoft, an Apple, an Amazon, that people have all those tools that they need and the technology that they have and the technology that they know how to use, that's a game changer, right? And that's what every human deserves. And we're going to do it.
Yeah. Blair, that is spectacular, man. That's invigorating. Congratulations on everything that you have done to date and everything that you're going to continue to do, and the best success for you and the Team Gleason and the entire Gleason family. So thank you for coming on and sharing.
Well, thank you for having me. And, without people like yourself and wanting to tell this story, dig in, things don't change, right? So this is a team effort. ALS takes a village, and I cannot thank you enough for intentionally and unintentionally becoming a part of ours.
Yeah. Look, I love it. I honestly, I started by talking about the thrill of the research and learning about your family, and the thought that I actually get to sit down and talk to you and with someone that's changing the world in the way that you are is just a great gift in my life. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. You can't talk to Blair without talking about Steve Gleason, obviously, and you consider that story, an athlete playing at the top of his game loses his gift. And you imagine the trauma that must go along with that. But as Gleason is navigating through that, he's able to look beyond himself and to help others. At the same time, Blair joins in the journey, and he's there for the ride. This is a guy that was hyper focused on his career. He was a master's in accounting. He's learning Chinese. He's doing immersive studies in China to learn Mandarin. Gets back to the U.S., ends up teaming up with Gleason, gets into Team Gleason, and he does a complete life shift and puts all of his passion into Gleason family support, but also seeing the vision for Team Gleason and how he can change the world through helping others. Stories like that is what I live for. It was such a great pleasure to meet Blair. We appreciate him coming in, and we appreciate you guys watching. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.